please welcome to the stage our panelists to discuss Hollywood and China.
I'm going to plunge fairly quickly into the discussions, but I'm going to say thank you for coming here this morning, and thank you also to our panelists for being so flexible. We organized this conference in a short amount of time, so I thank people like Rance for stepping in at the last moment, and Sean for doing multiple things. Welcome to our panelists. You can see everyone's pictures on the board, I think, somewhere. Aine, I'm going to ask you first of all, ladies first, but also we had a very worrying conversation yesterday, you and I, briefly. You said you'd been reading some of my stuff. In fact, you said you'd been reading a lot of my stuff. So we're in danger of having a circular argument. You're going to quote me and I'm going to quote you, and it's the same.
We're both right.
We're both right. But I'm going to ask you the general question, but as an academic or someone who writes at length about the industry, how do you see the China-Hollywood relationship as it is today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so I'll kind of take an even more broad perspective than I think a lot of the panelists have taken, looking at the historical vantage point. But so right now we're in a really interesting period of time in which we're coming to the end of China's 12th fifth-year plan, where there was this emphasis on the growth of the culture industries. So from the highest policy levels, we see a rise in emphasizing the global growth of China's media industries. So what that translates into is the growth of kind of these culture industry clusters, one of which is related to the Oriental DreamWorks development, but there are also other developments around Shanghai for animation, for music, that are kind of government-supported efforts to build the culture industries. We also, many of you have heard about Xi Jinping's China Dream, and this kind of effort to expand China's overall profile. Now, on the other side, we have Hollywood, which is the kind of most successful branding and marketing juggernaut in the world. So who better to work with to kind of expand the global profile of the Chinese media industries than Hollywood studios? So we have this kind of symbiotic relationship between Chinese government efforts to expand the Chinese culture industries and the obvious appeal of the market to Hollywood studios. Now, how long this mutual accommodation will last, I think, is uncertain. We're seeing more investment from Chinese studios in the U.S.
Absolutely.
We're seeing also not really some relaxation of Chinese government regulations, but actually a tightening in certain areas as well, particularly with regard to digital distribution platforms. And then also we have in 2017 the renegotiation of the 34 film import quota, but it's not really clear at that point what will ultimately happen. So I think right now we see this really interesting mutual accommodation, but I think what the future will hold with regard to that really is uncertain. But I see maybe a growth in the Chinese media and entertainment industry, and but not necessarily the parallel growth in Hollywood.
Interesting.
If I'm going to be as the person who doesn't have a stock to represent.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rance Powell, I'm going to turn to you next. Rance, you are a consultant, investment advisor, but also we know you also as someone who has tracked the development of the exhibition industry in China. You have bespoke and unique data on that. Sometimes you publish it, sometimes you reserve that for your clients, but you have a tremendous insight into the way that the Chinese exhibition sector has grown out. Lots of people throw out the numbers about 10 or 15 screens per day, but less, I mean, I'd be very happy to hear your numbers, but I'd really, really like to understand what is the transformation that has occurred, that has happened as a result of this building process.
Transformation.
Yeah, to demographics, to audiences, to the ability to have wide releases and so on. Sorry.
Big question.
Do you want to go home? And
Rance has all the answers.
you know,
Don't worry.
what's-
It's
what's-
just which one he's going to bring out first.
You know, we've been observers to and advisors in the China market for over 10 years now. We've seen the change in the industry and the development of the industry over that period of time. And from yesterday's panel discussions and even earlier today, you know, people have talked about the development and the potential of China. I mean, but you know, just a few short years ago, that was still a question in many people's minds. I think the guesswork is over. You know, as you mentioned, Artisan Gateway is a business strategy investment advisor around the region. So we help clients understand the business environment and how to develop and capitalize on opportunities. You know, the China production industry, exhibition industry, the whole vertical industry has grown by leaps and bounds. You know, estimates for full year box office for 2015 is in the $6.7 billion range. That's up from 4.8 or so this last year. That's mid 30% year-over-year growth. You know, I think one of the other interesting points is the growth of market share by Chinese language films. So the Chinese, over time, through direct productions and also through collaborations, have become, you know, much better grupper making films, more commercial, better at marketing. The quality of the films, they look good. All of these things are factors that we see as very positive for the China market in the near term and further out.
And that's been all made possible by having an exhibition network which covers the country.
I think that's true, and the exhibition story is not one that's frequently talked about in panels that focus on the creative area, but you know, the China business has definitely benefited from the development of cinemas in China. So multiplex cinema development, which on average has grown by high 20s, low 30% per year, has created a virtuous cycle for filmmakers in that market, more points of distribution, more opportunities to sell tickets and the exhibition story is an important part of the growth.
Yeah. And I mentioned wide releases earlier on. I mean, you've now got the ability to reach so many people at once. I was trying to check the figures, but I don't think I fully succeeded. But this week's film, Lost in Hong Kong, I was reading suggestions that this was the widest ever release in the history of movies.
Yes, yeah, we've read the same. We've read the same thing.
Okay.
You know, that kind of data is very difficult to come by.
That's why
in the China market.
Still struggling to verify.
But you know, it's almost a moot point because the results of the films, you know, speak for themselves. There's a growing and very interested audience for films like Lost in Hong Kong, like Bill's film, you know, Monster Hunt before and so forth, and you know, that's going to continue in the near term.
So Chinese films can now be treated in the same commercial fashion as elsewhere, which is not something that was true 10, 15 years ago.
Absolutely, and particularly as it relates to the domestic market. The Chinese have discovered and are rediscovering their own stories, their own talent and stars, writers, and all of those are contributing to a fast-growing, a very strong, a very robust industry.
Yeah. Shandong Bing, Chinese companies and Chinese filmmakers have a growing interest, or perhaps have always had an interest in working with Hollywood, but now seems to be a lot of it happening. Your company's part of that. You're the head of film. Why don't you tell me your exact title, because I'm never exactly sure. You are working with Fosun these days, which is a large investment conglomerate, which has Hollywood investments and China investments in cinema. But you are also head of the unit that's actually making movies. So you got at least two hats there.
Yeah.
What is the interest in working with Hollywood, first of all? What are the Chinese looking for?
Yeah, for Fosun, like there are a lot of companies like the funds and the LPs in China. They want to get exploit the expertise and the profits that the studios, Hollywood, have gained around the global market. They want to bite a bit out of that cake. And because of the quota, system in China, you restricted number of the movies released, of foreign films released in China. So the bigger the project is, the movie is, they can get a bigger box of return in China. So they want to get that. But at the beginning, they think that the local market is not, they do not have the confidence in the local filmmakers. But given time now, there are another trend is that, and the filmmakers like Ning Hao, and there are so many Hollywood producers, studios approach him to make movies for the outside world or something, but he held negative attitude toward that. He's very confident in himself. I will make movies I like. I make movies for my audiences. So he, actually, I've discussed with him, and he refused to work with Hollywood. I don't care about the outside China market. I just care about my own market. So, and there's another trend is that for Chinese investors and production companies, they come over here to set up their own production companies or studios in Hollywood, and hiring not producers, they're hiring talents here. They meet writers, they meet stars, they meet filmmakers, and they have their own Hollywood productions. I think that will happen next year. You will see more movies coming out of that way. Even animated studios like Offering, they set up their own animated studios here, and they hire a lot of people doing already. I know is that they have 30 people in Hollywood doing their animated feature film here. So in future, related to China, we will have 3 kinds of foreign movies.
The three kinds are what? Sorry.
Movies. That's the studios. The blockbuster tentpoles, and then the co-productions.
Right.
And then the Hollywood movies financed, produced by Chinese.
I'm going to come back to all of this because I like these ideas, but I'm going to ask Bill immediately next. Do you see animation, which is something that Shan touched on, as being perhaps the easiest route for cooperation because it can be language agnostic?
Well, yes. That's the easy answer.
One word answers are not acceptable.
You can't get that out of a politician, but you can get it out of a producer. The reason that I'm involved recently in the last few years, we were out and raised money with VC money in China, in the United States, to make animation in China. And right now, Millie is a company that we have about 300 employees in Shanghai and Beijing that we're making animation. We're also expanding out into live action and stop motion and motion capture. But the reason that we started the company specifically in animation, censorship is not zero, but we can get through censorship in one day, or there's no issue with censorship.
Yeah.
We're making family movies. We can make a movie in English, and we can make it in Mandarin at the same time.
Right.
And the cost factor of doing that is incredibly low because of 3D animation. We can make it all in English. We've learned which is the most economic way. It's actually easier to make things in English first, and then go back and make them to change it into Mandarin. Animation is done in layers, so the last layer is the face and mouth layer. But animation is one of those art forms that can reach around the world and have a very long tail and sell forever. So that was the choice. I have been involved in making live action movies my whole life, and have made animation for Disney, but this looks like, at least from my experience in the world of China, because I've worked with Stephen Chow and I've worked with Jackie Chan, and this is the easiest way to get in and to explore it.
I mean, Millie Pictures may not be known to everybody here. Can you just tell us a little bit?
Millie Pictures is, there was a gaming company called Shanda, which is a very large gaming company, and they have a lot of IP, and they wanted to take their IP and they wanted to make it into movies.
Yeah.
And I was approached about 2.5, 3 years ago to try to develop their IP and to make it into movies. And eventually the company was spun off as a completely separate company. We went out and raised our own capital, and we finance our own movies. And Millie Pictures, the first one was called Dragon Nest, which is a Shanda IP. Came out last year in China. It'll come out by Universal next month. And we have 5 other animated movies in production. And they're all, most of them are by, like Mike Johnson is directing one, who is an American director. We have an Italian director. We are kind of looking around to have, and all these directors are usually teamed with Chinese directors. So there are, in animation you can do that. We can have co-directors, and that's what we're doing. So we can approach the culture from both a Western viewpoint and a, and your previous guest, I was saying you pass the script back and forth. The script to go back and forth like 50 times and being translated. You know, it gets written in English, gets written in Chinese, gets rewritten back into English. Literally, we do that every day. We have translators that are constantly translating. You know, the script will be made in English, and then I'll get it back in English a month later or weeks later, and you go, that's a good idea, but nothing that we did.
Right.
You know, and then that's a bad idea. That's something that we should discuss. So we constantly send back and forth. And I think this is actually a new process in China. When I first was working with Jackie Chan and Stephen Chow, you know, you talk to those guys who'd made movies, and they made them with no scripts. They had treatments. You say, you know, like Jackie goes, yeah, we'd write the treatment the week, and then we'd go out and shoot the next week. And the script supervisor's job was to write down the dialogue that we wrote on the set.
Sounds like the old Hong Kong way.
It was the old Hong Kong way.
Making a movie in 3 months.
Yep. So I think that's a big change in China, that we're developing screenwriters. We actually have a crew of people now that are screenwriters. I think that's new.
Right. I'm going to put you on the spot here, but is Chinese animation original?
The influences of people like DreamWorks and Pixar and Disney are extremely heavy. And we as creative people and our directors and our Chinese directors are trying to do things that look like themselves and not like, it's a conscious effort that we don't want to look like Pixar and we don't want to look like Disney and we don't want to do a song like Pixar, we don't want to do a song like Disney. We actually make a conscious effort to say, where do we fit in and what do we want artistically?
You're saying that's what the
Millie's,
philosophy Millie Pictures.
Millie Pictures is definitely, when you look at our work, I don't think Pixar would make it, I don't think Disney would make it.
Right.
Not that I wouldn't like to make.
I mean, we often hear the criticism that the Chinese animation, first of all, wasn't actually very good technically, and then secondly, as the standards of production have improved, we hear the criticisms that the stories are not original, they're just rip-offs. And you know, 2 days ago I posted a trailer on Variety's website of another Chinese animation film, and the comments are, where did these people rip this Disney film off from?
Well, listen, my films have been ripped off in Chinese.
Sure.
So, but traditionally, China animation came out of animation for children. A lot of Chinese animation, you know, there was an area of feature film, but a lot of Chinese animation traditionally ended up on television or was made by television. The old system to produce animation in China, you know, you had the central government, which supplied funding to the different 6 studios, and they were allowed to make so many minutes or hours of animation and so many feature films. It came down to animation, and I might be wrong because it's not my expertise, but they were given like $1,000 an hour, or like the amount of money that they were given to produce children's material in animation was tiny, you know. And so what happens, they produced a lot of animation, but they had no funds really to do it. So they produce it very inexpensively, and it's not from our Western viewpoint, it's not good.
And the story originality, is that coming through yet?
Well, I think that at least at Millie, Jack Chang, who is the chairman, his feeling is that he's Shanghaiese, is very nationalistic, loves China, wants to produce Chinese product, and wants it to be appreciated around the world. And that is a delicate balance. How do we produce, for example, Bill Kong's Monster Hunt it's going to make almost $400 million in China.
Right.
And I know he just sold it to a distributor. I'm not part of the deal. He sold it to the distributor for very, very, very little money.
A distributor in North America?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very little. So a movie that made $400 million is being sold in the United States, I don't know, maybe $1 million. It's because we couldn't, the feeling is you can't appreciate the Chinese story. So at Millie, what we're trying to do is walk the balance it's the same thing when I work with Stephen Chow, is we try to walk the balance of keeping cultural integrity, which is significant and important to a person like Stephen and a person like Jack Zhang is the chairman, along with knowing that you want to market to the rest of the world. What rough areas can be sanded off? What ideas can be explored that will make it more accessible to an audience? And that's a discussion we have all the time.
But you're producing primarily for the China market. I mean, that's a key point. You're making films that are accessible to a global audience.
Correct.
But you're making films mainly for the domestic Chinese market.
Correct. So we're trying to walk the balance, knowing that we finance our films, they are going to be paid for out of the Chinese market, and hopefully they'll be accessible to the international market.
Yeah, given time, when there are more marketing for local Chinese, that kind of movies, I think the audiences outside China will appreciate more and more of the movies like that.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
We feel that it's not black and white, it's gray.
Right.
So you can make Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and it can be appreciated around the world, and you ask the question, why? What was the magic?
Yeah.
And the answer I thought was great. There was no magic, it was work. There was a little bit of magic, but great director. But it was work. It was having that Western influence. In fact, Bill Kong, who is a friend of all of ours, who was here the other day, he said, the idea of mixing the two cultures is only going to make things better. And if you work with Feng Xiaogong, who I really love and I really like his films, and we know it, he does take the attitude, it's okay, I'll make my Chinese movies and I don't have to mix. Our attitude is that we're trying to mix the cultures, and blend them somewhat.
Well, he may be doing a Chinese remake of Notting Hill.
Really?
Yeah.
That's great.
So he's looking at mixing things.
Yeah.
A question for all of you. Is Chinese screenwriting currently too weak? And is that something that's going to be improved by working more with Hollywood? Or are they going to be drilled into a Hollywood system of 3 acts and be told this is the one way you must do things?
My really quick answer is that there hasn't been a tradition of great screenwriting in China. And all of us who develop movies love writers. And China has been a tradition driven by directors who say, I have a vision, and the financiers step up and say, we trust your vision, Feng, go out and do it. And in this day and age, I think that it's more difficult. You have to develop scripts.
I think we also need to think about what is good writing and what is what's an appealing product. And I was just having a conversation with someone else about this earlier today. From the perspective of commercial filmmaking and from the perspective of having an immediately legible 3-act structure, yes, Chinese screenwriting has been historically weak. But does that mean that there aren't interesting stories or there aren't interesting Chinese screenwriters? I mean, as a former student at the Beijing Film Academy, I really take issue with that claim. I knew tons of really smart people who were great writers, but they didn't write in the format that would make a commercially viable Hollywood film. And that's not the same thing as not being a talented storyteller.
Exactly. Dongbing?
Yeah, there's a lot of difference of the different the screenwriting. Now, the younger generation has been seeing Hollywood movies more and more. They get used to the three-act story structure. And the younger writers now, they are catching up, learning a lot of these kind of skills already. But still, I think that the Chinese way of telling stories will remain for some genres, like romance, like local comedies. They won't take the three-act stories, but that three-act structure will be more for adventures, fantasy movies, action films, that kind of thing. So recently, I've read some two treatments inspired by the Journey to the West. You know, the story is just very local, Chinese way. You know, I think they want to make bigger budget movies, like 100 million US. I think no way you cannot get this back, the investment back from only Chinese market. So you have to use the way of Hollywood structure, telling the story a different way for the global market. So that's the difference, I think.
Also, one thing I've noticed lately, the people come in my office in Shanghai and screenwriters and people with ideas, I always go, are you old enough to be working? They all seem to be like 18 years old. So I think they've been influenced. You know, they have excitement. The younger, they have nothing to hold on. They're not stuck in their ways. Just like with talking about marketing films, we market films through television and they can pull up their cell phone and that's great marketing for them. It's the same with screenwriting.
Yeah, very good example is that my friend, former colleague Zhe Tiedong, you know, he's now popular in China. He's translated a book about how to write the script, right?
Oh, well, that's...
He's now he's giving lectures almost every week now about how to
that's
write
why I don't see him anymore. He's out in the lecture circuit. What are you making at Fosun? I mean, you've had a few months to start to get your slate together. What are you doing? What are you making?
Now, it's too early for Fosun to understand all these things. So
you're on a panel, you can't answer that.
So we are now looking for project to finance. Yeah. So for us, we just to be very experimental now at this stage. Yeah. We can still, you know, for us the market changes a lot. You know, we keep contact with the filmmakers, producers for the moment to try local, low-budget films. And then we invested in some co-productions. Yeah, and even some movies that cannot have not Chinese elements. I get invest, but have the China rights for distribution. So mostly focus on that. But all these movies for co-productions of foreign movies will have a franchise potential. Yeah.
But just looking at the Chinese ones that you're making, you say low budget and local and experimental for you. But are there particular genres you favor or genres that you rule out? What's in and what's out?
For local movies, I will still try that the thriller, low budget thriller will have still always there, the potential and the possibilities to survive, like you know the 京城81号 that kind of, and the Mysterious Island. Yeah, that kind of things, low budget, but the narration, the visual things you have to change, have to be made quality style. So we think that the Spanish thriller horror movies were successful in China market. Yeah.
Well, as remakes or
original movies. They just imported the original movies and very popular. Yeah, even in theaters. So we think about that. I focus on work with very young directors on these kind of things. Yeah.
What is low budget by your standards?
Below 1 million US, or maybe sometimes half.
And what about the opposite end of the scale? I mean, you're also invested in Studio 8, which is Jeff Robinov's company. I don't think they've completed anything, but they've started production on a couple of things. You know, they're making big budget Hollywood movies. How does that fit into your spectrum?
For that part is up to Studio 8 to make decisions. But for Fosun, it's just the green light for the business, for the market things.
So you're purely looking at that as a financial position in those movies?
Yeah, for me getting involved is I can give them the input from the China market, what the market it will be. Yeah.
And one of the early movies that you're involved in is the next Ang Lee movie.
Yeah.
Billy Lynn's Long Half-Time Walk, which strikes me as particularly American story. How's that going to play in China?
Because of the Ang Lee. Ang Lee's he's a god.
I thought you might say that.
Yeah. And some of the international filmmakers for China, it's you know, the audiences and even the professionals, they will just believe them, trust them, you know, like the Christopher Nolan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those movies, the Chinese investor says, okay, whatever he make,
anything he does. Okay.
Invest in the brand.
Yeah, just in the brand.
That's great for him.
Yeah.
But those films, are you structuring them as co-productions, or are they purely financial participations?
Purely financial.
So there's no guarantee, apart from Ang Lee's name on it, that film is going to get an import license?
Yeah, more or less you can get the access for the China market. Yeah.
But not all of the Studio 8 investments will come into China. So you have to see those as purely financial.
Right.
Very interesting. That kind of brings us on a little bit more to co-productions, and I'm going to ask Aim to tell us a little bit more about the co-production situation. China has its own rules on co-production, and America doesn't have a treaty with anybody. So China obviously doesn't have a treaty yet. How is this relationship working?
Yeah, so there are a variety of different categories. The one that we talk about the most, and the one that Shan Dongbing is working diligently on, as we were discussing earlier, is this 34 film import quota, of which 14 films are special format films, so IMAX or 3D. And that was an agreement that was made in relation to China's WTO as part of a dispute resolution following China's WTO accession in 2012, and it will be revised in 2017. But that's not the only way to enter the market. We've talked about this idea of financial participation. There are also buyout films that were mentioned yesterday, where basically the distributor just purchases the film and doesn't get any of the back end on the distribution. So that's another way of entering the market. There are also, and then we have co-productions, which can circumvent this 34 film import quota by having approval from the very beginning of the production process all the way through the end. And from the State Administration of Press, Publication, Radio, Film, and Television.
And assisted production.
Well, so I don't know. I've got all my categories, man. Don't worry. So assisted productions, as Rance helpfully pointed out, are productions that are shot in China, but they don't necessarily have that distribution approval. Sometimes assisted productions are distributed in the market, but from my understanding, it's usually as a buyout film or as a part of the 34 film import quota. And then to just kind of give my manuscript a plug, there's a category which I think is really underappreciated, which is this idea of what I call just faux productions. So things that start off as co-productions, so they get approval in the beginning stages. So SAFT reads the script. They may be giving notes along the process, but as a result, there's some kind of a break somewhere in the process where the co-production status is lost, either as a result of a lack of insufficient investment or some disagreement about the narrative structure. disagreements in the production process. So we can think about films like the Weinstein Brothers' Shanghai. It started off as a co-production. They lost co-production approval. They had to move production to Thailand. Eventually it received co-production approval again for distribution. Also films like Iron Man 3 or Looper, which had co-production approval for large portions of the film, but ultimately were not released as co-productions. And these are really interesting films in the sense that they are essentially bringing the regulatory process and the production processes between the two cultures closer together, because SAFT is giving feedback on the production process, but not necessarily with the end result of a co-production. So I think that this is kind of a way in which these industries are converging that is often not discussed as much as
But
it should be.
is it also an obstacle? Because the Chinese regulations on co-production are essentially requiring a proportion of Chinese elements to be on screen, to be in terms of ownership and so on.
Yeah.
And making those films as co-productions therefore requires you to behave fully like a Chinese movie, which means script approval before you shoot and again before you release. And that has been an obstacle in some cases because the Hollywood studios don't really want to give someone else final cut.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Why? I mean, we already hear all of these discussions about how difficult it is to deal with like producers.
But you're calling it, you're saying that the two regulators are coming together? Or?
Well, okay, so yeah, but
or are they being driven apart?
So essentially, the kind of collaborative, so the faux production process is kind of this forced engagement, which ultimately doesn't, like frequently we see cases where like the producers are like, okay, we're not going to give final cut to SAFT, and but letting someone in to the pre-production process or on set is a pretty big step also. I mean, that's not a small type of engagement,
sure.
And that's not something that we see in really a lot of other markets happening. Similarly, as we were talking about with animation, this emphasis on the growth of family entertainment in China, this is already kind of a form of adjustment in terms of the type of content and the type of material that producers who are interested in working in China are looking at, which I think makes a lot of sense. And I mean, in my book, I talk about this as an important strategy for engagement. But it also, if we look at it externally, does limit the types of content, the types of stories that we would tell, and may limit that type of content globally if, as China is growing into the largest market.
Rance, you're looking anxious.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's interesting. To me, this discussion of family entertainment, when we're talking about the China market, makes complete intuitive sense. It's common sense. The hurdles and the barriers to getting films produced, distributed or imported, and then distributed, marketed, and so forth in China, are substantial enough. Where if you can remove a hurdle in the process, make it easier for you to get your film out. So that people can see it and appreciate, buy tickets for it, and so forth. Why not?
Yeah.
Right. And so this family space, I think, is an area in China that we're going to see to continue to grow, if nothing else, for that reason. And we talk a lot about the China market and kind of the motivations and kind of the untalked about behind the scenes. But I think what you can see over these last number of years in China is that the China film and cinema industry is developing very well as a commercial industry. Yes, of course. I mean, there are producers and there are state-owned affiliated groups that are producing films with a special purpose. There are groups that are out there that are interested in telling certain types of story, documentaries and so forth. But the vast majority, and I think with this audience and what we spend our time focused on is the commercial part of the business. People want to make movies to entertain people. They want to touch people and do important things. But it's a commercial business, and hopefully that creates a virtuous cycle that's continuous in the long term.
And sorry, I just wanted to assert that I agree with you 100%. But I think that we need to talk also about why we're choosing this. And so.
Go on.
No,
Why
no,
we're choosing?
I agree with Rance that I think that strategically, like, let me be very clear. I think the family space and family entertainment space is by far the best and most strategic place to enter, both in animation and in live action. That's, but I think that there are other types of commercial films that producers are actively choosing not to make in China. And I think that, I think that we need to also talk about the fact that producers are choosing not to make those films. Or I will talk about that.
Do so.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense, and I think it's a strategic decision. But just to say, like, we're only in this because we're only interested in family entertainment really doesn't look at the reality of, like, the types of films that are being.
But hasn't Dongbin given us the answer already? That, you know, co-productions can work in that family general entertainment space, but something slightly edgier like thrillers you have to do as financial investments only.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So,
Well, I'll tell you, we were looking at Chinese films, and you might know actually more than I do, but I think only 7% of films made in China were family.
Mm-hmm. That sounds.
Seems like a good business to get into.
To grow the category.
Yes.
For this, what kind of movies for co-productions? You just see that the Hollywood 34 movies being approved to be released in China. That says everything. You know?
Yeah.
That type of movies can be made for co-productions, official co-productions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That explains, what genre you can do for co-productions. Yeah.
But imported films sometimes seem to have to be slightly edgier than the ones that are being released and made and released in China.
Very difficult, edgy things. Like Django movie is just like an exception.
Yeah. Well,
So are there double standards? One rule for the foreign films and one for the Chinese movies?
They try to do that to make the exceptions for some awarded movies in 3 festivals, like Cannes,
Yes.
Venice, or Berlin, and then the Oscar awarded movies.
So if you're Ang Lee, you can have an exception, and if you win Cannes, you can have an exception.
Yeah.
Great. It's quite difficult to beat.
But still difficult. They say that it could be an exception, but still, in terms of content, the censorship is still very tough.
Right. And right at the beginning, you mentioned what happens after the quota, the current quota regime expires.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could speak to that. What do you think and what do you hope will happen? Well, also maybe just bring you up to date. I mean, the 2012 agreement that was struck in, I think, February of that year was actually signed this weekend by Joe Biden and Xi Jinping during the Xi Jinping visit. I was thinking that's 3.5 years old, and the treaty, sorry, the agreement is about to get renegotiated.
Yeah.
But
so,
then maybe there is a reflection on how bureaucracy and diplomacy works.
Yeah. So I didn't realize that the memorandum of understanding
Runs
was
until the end of
2012.
2016.
At that time, it was signed as a MOU.
Yes.
Now it's a real agreement.
Now it's official.
Yeah. So what I was going off of was the MOU, which is like billed as the Sino-U.S. treaty. So the official treaty was signed.
It was signed
This weekend.
like this week.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in implementation and in practice.
Yeah.
It was immediate.
2012,
Exactly.
it was
Implementation
immediate.
was straight away.
Yeah.
So living in DC has been really interesting because I think that we have, so talking with people at USTR and how, like, their perspective of what will happen, I think has been really revealing in terms of
Do share.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, because hearing people speak yesterday, there seemed to be an assumption that that the quota would be lifted in 2017, or there was kind of in the art of the deal making session they were talking about the possibility of and just reading the documents that are being released by Congress and the WTO proceedings, it doesn't seem like there's as much movement as that from what I've seen from the policy side. So I think it's optimistic, and I think it's possible that the treaty will be lifted in 2017. But and also this piece of input that the treaty wasn't actually signed until 3.5 years later. Kind of suggests that movement might be slower than lifting the quota in 2017.
Absolutely.
That's my kind of perspective on it, but I might not know.
Rance, again, you're jumping up and down. You might want to add something here.
Because we've got a number of the major studios, the MPA and so forth we do client work for them as well. And so we followed the development of the increase to 34. So it's 20 to 34. My understanding is that it's a maximum of the additional 14, 3D or large format like IMAX. So we can't exclude groups like China Giant Screen and so forth, large format. And I think the interesting point on this is that if you look at import films that come in as revenue share, nearly all of the big films, the big Hollywood films. I mean, number one, the first thing from a point before, 75% of the big commercial successes for quote Hollywood films that come in that are revenue share are part of big global franchises or sequels. So it's very, very hit driven and franchise driven. Nearly all of those that are imported into the China market under the revenue share quota, they're almost always available. They're always available in 3D or large format. So, making the designation that they have to be 3 or 5, it's just basically a relaxing, of the quota. And then you looking forward, to 2017. What we saw from the experience from 2012 to this point is that import films, of course, benefited greatly and in tandem with screen growth and with the development of the general industry overall. And there was an anomalous year, that first year, 2012, where if we all remember, the first half of 2012, basically the imported films grabbed a huge market, it was like 65% market share by mid-year 2012. And, as you got to the end of the year, the domestic market share box office never quite caught up. So 2012 was an unusual year. But I think for students of the China market, we all know that prior to 2012 and in those years since, Chinese language films, which is very generally defined, are routinely 50, 55, 60% total market share. So when we look, as market analysts, when we look forward to 2017, I think it's a good development. It's a part of a continuing trend. You may have an anomalous year, and then after that, you'll probably see the market continue to grow, and Chinese language film will be 50, 55, 60% market share overall by the end of 2018.
Do you see the market, with all this building of new cinemas, as actually having capacity for more big blockbuster Hollywood films?
Sure. Yeah. The thing about cinema building in the China market now is that after 10 years, 12 years of multiplex building, at very fast pace, it's now reaching into very small markets. So the major markets, so-called first-tier markets, second-tier markets, now we're into tertiary markets, and the big first-tier markets are really into now second-generation redevelopment of cinemas and new shopping malls that are being built. So screen growth is going to continue to grow very quickly. This year it's going to be probably high 20% growth, but box office is going to grow mid 30, 35%. So box office growth is still outpacing screen growth. That's the sign of a very healthy business. But eventually that's going to slow.
We're going to take questions in a moment or two, but I have one more kind of formal question for the panel. We saw the announcement the other day of Warner doing a joint venture in China to get into local production. There are others on the ground already, including Village Roadshow, DreamWorks, and so on. Is that the way forward? Are we going to see many more of those? Are they going to be very big? And also, as a kind of a follow-up question to that is, how easy is it to express Chinese culture in English?
So, yeah, I will say that.
He's going to be doing those deals.
Yeah, I don't think that's, well, it will take time, not all of a sudden. because I think we heard a lot about the Oriental DreamWorks, even about the Kung Fu Panda 2 and 3 and then the new one. You know, the Chinese part want to control the storytelling, but Jeffrey Katzenberg wants to control. There's conflict. Yeah, in what way we will tell the story? If it's a JV for a production of local Chinese movies, I don't think that there will be a solution for that. Yeah, they will fight in a way. Like Ning Hao said, the same. I don't listen to you. You pay me, I just do my own movie. Yeah, it's the same. So the Chinese producers are now, that's why I said they're coming over to Hollywood. Okay, they are doing the Chinese way. Okay, I pay you, you writer, you listen to me, I tell you what I want. So that's a tailor-made product for China. So I don't care. If there's an outside overseas market, okay. If we do not have it, no problem. Yeah, our market is big enough for 10 million or 20 million US productions. So that's why they are doing that. I don't think Village Roadshow is just following the local Chinese productions. They're just financing it. The Stephen Chow's movie, even some local movies. They cannot put in too much creative.
And possibly they're working on a smaller scale of budget as well.
Right, because the regulation is there. You cannot control a local productions. So that's why the Warner Brothers JV with the CMC is registered in Hong Kong. They have offices in Shanghai and Beijing. Because the JV companies cannot produce local movies.
Anyone else want to take this one? More structural cooperation between Hollywood and China like that?
I can. Oh,
Go ahead.
I think that if you read the history of how long it's taken Oriental DreamWorks and Disney and Warner Brothers to actually get these projects on the ground, the amount of sustained capital that it requires, the amount of kind of negotiations that it requires, the amount of political access. If you look at who was at the state dinner, I think basically if you look at the list of who was at which media companies were at the state dinner with Xi Jinping and Barack Obama, then we have a short list of people who could potentially get a studio deal on the ground in China. I don't think that and then other companies would kind of probably be moving more in the local production process or these kind of smaller individual-based collaborations. So.
France?
At the macro level, we expect that we'll see continuing and maybe accelerated deal making. It makes good commercial sense. I think the interesting part, as Shan was kind of alluding to, is how the partnerships, work on the ground. But the U.S. is still the largest box office market in the world. China's number 2 and gaining ground quickly. The next couple of years, it'll overtake in gross terms. There's too much business. There's too big an audience at stake for there not to be more mutual understanding and collaboration. So I think that we'll see more deal making in general.
Sure.
I agree, because
you agree.
Studios will follow the money, and the money's in China.
Okay, that allows us time for about a couple of questions. There's a microphone and a man ready to ask a question. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, Rob Kane. I'm a film producer and a writer focused on China.
And a great analyst of China, too.
Thank you, Rance.
True.
I appreciate that. I'd like to offer an observation and then ask any of the panelists who care to respond to it. I think there's really an inherent tension for the Chinese government, and particularly the Communist Party, in allowing foreign films into the country, and especially allowing so many Hollywood imports. The leaders have made it clear on many occasions that they don't really care much for the influx and proliferation of Western values in China. So my question is, what's really in it for the Chinese government and the party to allow foreign films in? And what motivations would they have to relax the quota
except for pressure from the WTO and MPAA and other outsiders?
Good question. Ayn?
No, I mean, I agree with you, basically. No, I mean, so yeah, I think that there is, I mean, apart from international trade pressure, I don't think that there's a lot of incentive to increase the import quota, especially because China, they're more, one of the reasons for wanting to increase the import quota, particularly to these special format films, is, as Rance pointed out, there was this kind of rapid growth of exhibition capacity, and having foreign films that would be able to take advantage of that exhibition capacity was of benefit. But in 2017, there will be a lot of, we have IMAX China, as Rance pointed out, the growth of large format Chinese films, the growth of, so I think that Chinese films will be in the position to take advantage of that increased exhibition capacity. That being said, media and entertainment is a huge industry in the U.S., so I think that the U.S. government will still kind of make these complaints through the WTO dispute resolution board. So it's unclear how that ultimately will happen. But currently, I think that the impetus to accommodate foreign capital really has to do with the fact that there are still benefits that the Chinese domestic industry can derive from Hollywood investment. The development of the animation industry, as we've been looking at, this kind of scriptwriting collaboration to make films that are global in nature. I think that there's still definitely space and a lot of benefit for the Chinese government and for the Chinese film and media industry, particularly as we're seeing a slowdown in growth rates in China. The development of new industries is particularly important.
Yeah, and Rob, I agree, and I maybe just one person's opinion, but you know, as big as China is, as important, I mean, it's the biggest story in terms of global growth, but you know, the Chinese film industry is still not a global film industry. So the continuing development and professionalization, the training and so forth, so that Chinese creative companies and film-based companies can begin to tell stories and make films that appeal to a global audience is still on the table. And you know, the professional standards, the benchmarks for success, you know, rightly or wrongly, at a global level are the Hollywood studios. Yeah. So they are the models of success. That's what we talk about, the type of storytelling and so forth, 3 acts. And so, you know, what's at stake is the continuing development, professionalization of the industry, and then access to the global marketplace. Eventually, when the Chinese films are ready for that audience and people will buy tickets for those films, they'll be prepared.
And is that really about soft power? Is that what we're talking about for the export of Chinese films?
Okay, I look at this in 2 ways. Yeah, you mean about the media, about the policy, the government, in terms of the history of China exchange with the cultural exchange and the ideology exchange with the world. You know, in the history, it's kind of the religion in China, the ambition in China. You learn about that history, you will know what is happening now in China. You know, that's very important. And the second way is that every country, their policy towards media is the same with China. U.S. government do not allow Chinese communists to set up your press here, like all those things. The same in China, the same. You know, the Murdoch has to become a U.S. passport holder so that he can open the Fox channel. It's the same in China.
That's a very interesting observation. And unfortunately, it's going to be the last one. I know there are more questions, but on our monitors here, we're getting big signs saying, stop now, you've run out of time. So it's always a good thing to leave people wanting. You're not going to be able to ask your question in public, but I do suggest you grab them afterwards. And that just leaves me to say thank you for coming. Thank you for being ready to ask us questions. It may mean that we were interesting enough to sustain your attention. And thank you very much to my panelists for being there.
Thank you.